Welcome to Tino's Time, and on this episode, we are going to recap Week 9 of the NFL fantasy football season, and then we're going to preview Week 10 and get you ready to set your lineups like we always do. What a wild Week 9 it was. We saw one Josh Allen destroy the other Josh Allen, and we didn't think it was going to be that way. We thought it was going to be the other way. We saw the underdog teams beat all the teams that were supposed to win. We saw one of the greatest running backs in the game ever return and get his first touchdown on the Tennessee Titans on Sunday Night Football in place of King Henry. And let's not waste any more time, and let's get into everything that happened in Week 9, and let's start off with the Monday night game. It was the Chicago Bears versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was Justin Fields, the returning David Montgomery, and Darrell Mooney versus Ben Roethlisberger, Najee Harris, and Deontay Johnson. And what a game this was. As a football fan, the game was really good, but the one thing I do gotta say is that those refs were definitely Steelers fans. I have never seen so many penalties in a game for one team and the other team not get any as it was. The Bears were getting penalized on every single play, on a touch, on a this, a that, not turning around. But then the Steelers got away with tackling Justin Fields and popping his head off. They got away with roughing the passer. They got a chop block that wasn't even a chop block and took away a touchdown from the Chicago Bears. And I'm not giving any excuses, but as an NFL fan and in the NFL in general, they need to look at this because that was ridiculous as just a fan, and it was just an awful penalized officiated game, and it honestly costed the Chicago Bears the game. But David Montgomery returned. Oh my God, sorry, I couldn't say that for a second. He returned and he had 63 yards. He had 2 receptions and 17 points. And that was not bad for a return. The Chicago Bears now go on a bye, and they return in 2 weeks to face the Baltimore Ravens. Justin Fields, though, showed what a playmaker and what a quarterback he is going to be in this game. And what a great quarterback he's going to be down the road. And the Chicago Bears definitely made the right decision. He showed everybody on primetime. He threw for 291 yards, 1 touchdown. He did have an interception, but this was his best game of his career and season. By far, and he seems to only be getting better and better as the weeks go on, and the Bears now, like I just said, get to go on a bye, and I think that will definitely be beneficial. We saw Allen Robinson actually make a big catch that brought the Bears down to score the touchdown. We saw Darrell Mooney have 2 touchdowns. He had 3 receptions for 41 yards, and then he had a 15-yard rushing touchdown on a little trickery play. We saw Cole Clemette come out, and if you needed a tight end, I told you last week you could possibly stream Cole Clemette. He had 6 receptions, 87 yards, and as in the tight end position, that's awful. It's awful to find a tight end. So if you're able to grab Cole Clemette, then you're feeling good on a Monday night when you needed some points. On the other side of the ball, Big Ben had 205 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, and if you streamed him and you were worried about a quarterback, that's not bad from a streaming quarterback. Najee Harris had 62 yards, 3 receptions, and 16 receiving yards. Like I said, he had the 1 touchdown in the beginning of the game. But other than that, he really didn't seem to get going. But he still ended up with 16.5 fantasy points, and that's really good. But the guy that was the best out of everybody, I feel like, in this whole entire game, it was Freeman, the tight end for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had 5 receptions, 42 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And again, we just talked about Clemette. The tight end position is so hard to come by, so if you were streaming tight ends and you started him on Monday night, he might have led you to victory, and you're feeling real good about it. The Monday night game was one of those games that was just crazy, and it was wild, and it just, the Bears ended up losing 29-27, but in fantasy purposes, it was a really good game for both sides of the ball, and Justin Fields showed that the Bears have a quarterback for the future, like I said earlier, and, it might not have worked out for the Chicago Bears. Chris Boswell hit the game-winning field goal, but it showed that Justin Fields, and he showed everybody on primetime what a great quarterback this guy is going to be. But enough about the Monday night game and the Chicago Bears. Let's go into the injuries that happened on Sunday and Monday. And one of the biggest injuries that happened is Chase Edmonds has a high ankle sprain, and he's probably going to be out for 3 to 4 weeks. But James Conner, we'll be talking about him in the studs of the week. He had a phenomenal game, and he might be the RB1 running back that we need and that we rely on, that we need in the second half of the season to lead us to a fantasy championship. Damien Harris from the Pittsburgh Steelers, or not from the Pittsburgh Steelers, my bad, thinking of the Steelers steal. From the New England Patriots, he has a head injury, and that is something you'll have to keep an eye on because those head injuries are tricky. Another running back that has a head injury is Zach Moss, and we'll be talking about the guy that is backing him up that you need to go get out on the waiver wire if he's still out there, because the Bills have a really good matchup this week versus the Jets, and you need to start all your Bills, but Singletary might be a great option. On the good note, though, for injuries, Russell Wilson, Dangerous Russ, is back. He got the pin out of his finger last week, and he has been cleared to return to action this week versus the Green Bay Packers. So put him back in your lineup and put Tyler Lockett back in your lineup, DK Metcalf. We'll have to see what happens with Chris Carson. I don't know if he'll be ready to come back, but put all your Seahawks back, because Dangerous Russ is back and he's ready to lead the Seattle Seahawks to a championship and help you win your fantasy football championship. Tua was ruled out this past Sunday before the game, and Jacoby Brissett got the start, and we'll have to see what happens because the Dolphins do play on Thursday night this upcoming week versus the Baltimore Ravens, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But, you know, the playmakers on the Dolphins, Myles Gaskin had a good game, Jalen Waddle had a good game, so even if Jacoby Brissett does start, I'm feeling good about still starting my Dolphins. You know, there wasn't too many great injuries. I mean, there wasn't awful injuries that happened this week, but hopefully Chase Edmonds can come back healthy and we can see all these guys back on the field real soon, because I hate seeing these injuries and it's just no fun. But now, let's get into the disappointments of the week and talk about the guys that probably cost you your week before we talk about the studs of the week and the guys that actually helped you win your week and you're feeling real good and you don't know what to do and you're just like freaking out. The tight end that really struggled this week was Austin Hooper. He had 3.4 points. And, you know, the tight end position, we talk about it every single week. It's so complicated to figure out. But, you know, it's just one of those things that, you know, David Njoku got a touchdown. And, you know, it's so hard to tell with those Cleveland Browns or tight ends. And, yeah, I don't know. The wide receivers, Kadarius Toney, he had 1.7 points. This is the third straight game under 8 points. And, you know, I just don't know what to do because, you know, honestly, I started Daniel Jones in one of my leagues last week, and I just don't want to trust any of the Giants. Maybe Devonte Booker. They're on a bye in week 10, so that at least helps us out that we don't have to worry about any of the Giants. We'll get to him in a minute. Rondell Moore, he had 7.5 points, and for a guy, you know, with DeAndre Hopkins out, Kyler Murray out, we thought Rondell Moore was going to have a better game, but he did not. Marvin Jones only had 5.1 points, and that just, you know, that wasn't going to do it, and Trevor Lawrence really struggled on Sunday, and, you know, I'm not saying to worry about Marvin Jones, but it's one of those things that he just might be matchup-based. Chase Claypool, on Monday night, we didn't talk about him during the Monday night game, but he had 6 points, and, you know, that was a guy everybody was relying on, and he just did not show up. A guy that has struggled the last few weeks, but I'm not worried about him. It's Jamal Chase. He had 8.9 points. He had a fumble on Sunday. He would have had 10.9 points if that fumble was not there. But, you know, I'm not worried about him. This man has been Rookie of the Year so far, halfway through the season. He's doing his thing, and he's going to lead you to a big championship, and he's going to lead you far in the fantasy playoffs. Keep starting him, and don't worry about it. He's on a bye this week, so he can go figure it out, get a reset and figure it out and come back and be the guy that we know he can be, that he showed in the first 6-7 weeks of the season. Even though he's only had a few bad weeks, don't worry about Chase. He'll be back and better than ever after the bye. Cordell Sutton, he didn't have a very good game, but Teddy Bridgewater showed that he is a great quarterback, and he destroyed the Dallas Cowboy defense. Tim Patrick had himself a really good game, but Sutton just could not get going. Now the running backs that struggled. Boston Scott, you got 4 points, and Kenneth Gainwell, gain nothing. You go out and get a touchdown the week that everybody starts Boston Scott and then nobody starts you. And I'm just over it. I'm over the Philadelphia Eagles running game, and I don't want to start anybody or deal with that. And I just don't want to deal with that because I'm over the Philadelphia Eagles always screwing us. Just give Jalen Hurts the rushing touchdowns. Let him do it all. At least we start Jalen Hurts every week. Austin Eckler, he had 11.2 points, and Justin Herbert had himself a game. He was throwing the ball up and down the field. Eckler, what are we going to do? Sit Austin Eckler? No, you're not going to sit Austin Eckler. The man can't put up 25 points every single week. He is human, and yeah. Speaking of a guy that is human, Zeke Elliot, he had 12.8 points. And, again, the Dallas Cowboys offense just looked awful. We're not going to sit Zeke unless you're, like, really deep at running back and the people in your league don't know how to draft. But, I mean, that's the only way I'd be sitting Zeke. But, again, you're not really sitting him. You drafted him so high for a reason. Aaron Jones, another guy. The Green Bay Packers just could not get anything going. Jordan Love looked like crap. The Packers just did not look okay. And Aaron Rodgers just showed how much he really does mean to the Packers. And yes, I know it was Jordan Love's first start and he was an Arrowhead and everything, but it just did not look the same to what it would have been if Rodgers would have played. The Packers would have destroyed the Chiefs, because the Chiefs only got 13 points and the Packers defense played phenomenal, but Aaron Jones just did not benefit at all. Jordan Love threw a late touchdown, but yeah, A.J. Dillon had a better game than Aaron Jones, and that honestly had a lot to do with Jordan Love starting. But we're not sitting Aaron Jones. Don't you dare think about it. I would definitely start A.J. Dillon in your flex, though, if you're worried about a flex or if you need a flex option. Quarterbacks, though, I want to take a second, because a guy in one of my leagues, he's been trying to trade Matthew Stafford, and he's like, come on, give me, I got Josh Allen, I got Stafford, I got this and that, I'm doing my thing. And, the week that everybody might have wanted to trade for him the most, Matthew Stafford goes out and puts up a dud versus the Tennessee Titans. And then Josh Allen also, he just did not have a very good game at all. He could not get going versus the Jaguars. There was no touchdown scored. The Jaguars won that game 9-6. He threw 2 interceptions, and it was just not a very good game. So, I'm sorry, but the guy in my league that was trying to trade away Stafford, yeah, this might have been one bad game, but this week, both of your quarterbacks had really bad, disappointing weeks, and maybe that's what you needed to take a step back and realize that you're not the best in the league. But another quarterback that started and that was not very good again, Daniel Jones, a guy that everybody keeps going to, and we're thinking that he's going to have a good week, but he never does, and it's just disappointing. He had 5.1 points, or 8.1 points, I'm sorry. Yeah, he hit over 5 points, people. That's good, but that still ain't going to do it for a quarterback. Jordan Love had more points than him. Justin Fields had more points than him. It's just, there's better quarterbacks out there than Daniel Jones, and honestly, unless you're desperate, keep Daniel Jones and don't even have him on your roster at all. But now that we talked about all the disappointments and all the guys that let us down, let's talk about all the guys that brought us up and led us to a victory this week in Week 9 and helped us get ahead of our friends and be the studs of the week and the Sunday showdowns and the Sunday top performers. We talked about it a second ago with Chase Edmonds. James Conner went out and showed he was the guy that was on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had 96 rushing yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He had 5 receptions. He had 77 yards receiving, and then he added a touchdown receiving. He finished with 3 total touchdowns and 40.3 fantasy points. This was a guy that wasn't even drafted in most leagues. This was a guy that everybody was like, is Chase Edmonds going to start? What are we going to do? Is James Conner going to start? There were a lot of people that was very high on him, but when I was just doing, I just didn't know what was going to go on in that backfield. But now with Chase Edmonds out for at least 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks, James Conner could easily be the RB1, like I said earlier, that we're looking for off the waiver wire that could lead us to a fantasy championship. Speaking of a guy that could lead us to a fantasy championship, Justin Herbert put on an absolute show on Sunday. He had 356 yards, 2 touchdowns, 14 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and he finished with 42.76 points. Justin Herbert, welcome back to the show after you had a couple dismal games, but we know that you were better than that, and welcome back to the top 10 performances and the studs of the week. Another quarterback that went out and showed, and he did his thing, and it was kind of a weird game because the Vikings and Ravens were going back and forth. The Ravens were down, the Vikings were up. It just kept going back and forth. But as the game kept going on, it just kept getting fantasy points bonanza and fantasy points galore. It was awesome. Lamar put up 256 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He had 120 rushing yards, and just for a quarterback to get 12 points off rushing yards is awesome. He finished with 43.96 points, and if you started Lamar, you're feeling real good. I know one guy who has Lamar, and he has this guy, Nick Chubb, went out, and again, he's another one. He's been up and, he's been consistent. He's had a couple down weeks, but he's been one of the guys this season that we've been able to consistently trust. He went out and put up to 137 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did have 2 receptions, and he finished with 30.3 fantasy points. So if you have Lamar and Chubb, you're feeling real good. Let's go all the way back to Thursday night, and let's talk about the Colts running backs. Nyheim Hines went out and put up 20.8 points, and Jonathan Taylor went out and put 34 points up. And if you had those 2 running backs on a Thursday night, you were feeling real good. I had Jonathan Taylor in one of my leagues, and sitting there watching on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, having a 34-point lead, definitely felt good going into Sunday. Another guy that performed really well on Thursday night, if you were able to start him, and maybe you just took the shot, or, it was Elijah Moore at 27.4 points. And, after Mike White, he just was not very good, and he ended up leaving the game, and we saw John Johnson come out. I think it was Josh Johnson, actually. But he came out, and he made Elijah Moore look like the number 1 receiver we thought the Jets were getting. He had 27.4 fantasy points, and another guy, if you're able to start on Thursday night, you were feeling real good going into Sunday. Carson Wentz. Is this the Carson Wentz that we've been waiting for? Is this the guy that was on the Eagles when the Eagles won the championship, but Nick Foles had to lead them after Carson Wentz got hurt? He had 272 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. He put up 36.62 fantasy points, and if you're starting Carson Wentz as a streamer, that's phenomenal. Speaking of a guy that, he's been up and down. He has good weeks, bad weeks. I have him in one of my leagues. I decided to start Jordan Love over him. But, of course, on my bench, Matt Ryan goes off and has 39.38 fantasy points, 343 yards passing. He had 2 total passing touchdowns, and he did rush in a touchdown. Of course, the week that I start him, or the week that I sit him, he doesn't do good, and then the weeks that I start him, he does awful. I don't know, maybe I just ruined quarterbacks. My dad always would tell me back in the day, when I started fantasy football, I would always draft Phillip Rivers, and be like, Trent, you just ruined quarterbacks' careers. Maybe that's just what I do. But, I'm sorry, but Matt Ryan, thank you for putting on a show. At least you were on my bench. The Patriots defense, though. The Patriots defense, depending on what type of a league you're in and how many points you get for defense to start off, they went out and scored 34 points in some leagues and 22 points in other leagues. The Patriots defense was one of my starts of the week. Do a little bit of a humble brag. Heck yeah, your boy Tino doing a little bit of a humble brag for starting the Patriots defense. Hopefully you did too. Welcome back from the injury list. A tight end that actually showed up and performed and did his thing on Sunday. And at the tight end position, George Kittle had 6 receptions, 101 yards, and 1 total touchdown. And he finished with 20.1 fantasy points. And getting him back off of the injured list and putting him back in your lineup and seeing those 20 points that you were hoping to get all season long feels so much better. And it's one of those things, yes, it sucks that it happened now, but at least we're getting it, and we're only halfway through the season. I can't even believe that we are officially halfway through the football season. I said it last week, I thought we were last week, but now that week 9 has ended, we are officially halfway through the NFL fantasy football season and the NFL season in general, and it's just crazy. So let's talk about the things that I did right. I just did a little bit of a humble brag for the Patriots defense and some of my bads. And let's start off with the my bads. Taysom Hill last week, he was one of my starts because after Jameis Winston got out and was out for the season with the torn ACL, I really thought that Taysom Hill was going to start for the New Orleans Saints, but they decided to start Trevor Siemian, and that didn't work out very well, and the Saints ended up losing to the Atlanta Falcons, and Matt Ryan put on a show. Mercedes Lewis was no good. We talked about the Packers a little bit earlier. Jordan Love was not very good. Aaron Jones was not very good. The whole Packers offense just looked awful. And the Packers really need to get Aaron Rodgers back this Sunday versus the Seattle Seahawks, or they might be in for a rude awakening when Dangerous Russ returns off of the injured list. McNichols didn't do anything. He didn't do what we were thinking. I had a bold prediction last week, and I thought maybe that McNichols was going to have a Derrick Henry type day on Sunday Night Football. But Adrian Peterson, we talked about it in the headlines, he returned from the dead. And yes, he did play last season, and he did have 800 yards for the Detroit Lions. But, Adrian Peterson coming back and scoring a touchdown was something that, it was weird. And we saw other guys in the game for the Titans. It's one of those things that they might have a 3 or 4 headed monster that we just can't figure it out. And to be honest, unless you're secretly desperate like I am in one of my leagues, I wouldn't really start any of the Titans running backs until we completely see what happens. But if you absolutely have to, I would start McNichols in PPR leagues, and then in standard leagues, I would start Adrian Peterson, and just don't expect to get a lot of points. And honestly, I would only start them in your flex if you were able to. Now, let's do a little bit of a humble brag, and let's talk about all the things that your boy Tino got right in Week 9. I just said it. The Patriots defense went nuts. They got 4 takeaways, 1 total touchdown. They only gave up 6 points allowed. Also, the Miami Dolphins defense, they were in one of my streams last week. Hopefully you were able to start them versus the Houston Texans. It didn't matter if Tyrod Taylor returned, if Davis Mills was the quarterback. The Houston Texans are a disaster, and it doesn't matter who they play. You need to start their defenses every single week, except this week because they're on a bye, so we can't do that. Myles Gaskin and James Conner. James Conner was one of my starts and one of my streams last week. Myles Gaskin, I told you if you needed a running back last week, start him. He did really good. Michael Pittman Jr., I told you last week to start him and do his thing, and he was feeling good. Him and Carson Wentz have a great connection, and he went off on Thursday night and got 2 touchdowns. Mike White, Thursday night football nightmare. I just talked about it. He got hurt. It was John Johnson. I forget what the first name of the guy was. I'm sorry. My bad. I'll add it to my bad. But the quarterback that came in for Mike White was phenomenal, and he did way better. And if you went out and you started Mike White and you were feeling good, hopefully you listened to me when I put out my preview on everything last Tuesday, and then when you listen to my show during the week, because Mike White was just a huge disappointment. So not even a humble brag, but just hopefully you listened to me and you didn't live up and you didn't buy into the Mike White hype era that lasted about 3 days. And let's now that we talked about my little bit of a humble brag and my badge for the week, let's talk about the three things that I learned from Week 9. Honestly, I don't even know what to expect anymore. We think that we know what's going to go on, and we don't know. We thought Josh Allen was going to go out and have a phenomenal game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, but the Jacksonville Jaguars showed up like they were the team that went to the AFC Championship three or 4 years ago. It was ridiculous. Dak Prescott didn't play what we thought he was going to do. There were so many things that happened. And like we talked about it was opposite day. And it was any given Sunday. And we saw the underdog teams win. So that's why you don't know. And, people always go off of the projections. And don't go off of the projections because we really don't know what's going to happen. And it really can be any given Sunday. And, fantasy football is honestly just based on luck. And hopefully that we set the right lineup and the guys that we start do what they're supposed to do. But it's just one of those things. We never really know what is going to happen. The second thing that I learned in Week 9, James Conner is back as the RB1 that we all wanted and that he was on the Pittsburgh Steelers. This guy a few years ago was getting drafted in the first or second round, and he fell all the way to the double-digit rounds. Some leagues he wasn't even drafted in some leagues he was on the waiver wire. And if you were able to get James Conner, he will probably be that guy that can lead you to a fantasy championship. And like we talked about it a lot in the show already, with Chase Edmonds being out, it's one of of those things that if you do have James Conner, you're feeling good and you're starting him every single week. Even if Kyler Murray's out, Colt McCoy's starting, whoever is starting, James Conner is now honestly becoming a matchup non-based guy, and he just needs to be in your lineup every single week. So welcome back to being an elite RB1, James Conner. Packers really need Aaron Rodgers. We just talked about it. Jordan Love, Aaron Jones, Devonte Adams. No one had a really good game except A.J. Dillon and the Packers defense on Sunday. The Chiefs really should not have won that game, to be honest, and it just showed how much the Packers really need Aaron Rodgers. So hopefully he can get tested negative. He has to get tested negative twice by Sunday. It will be 10 days, because I know I didn't say it last week, but he had to stay away from the team for 10 days because he was unvaccinated. If he was vaccinated, he wouldn't have had to do that, and he probably would have had a possible chance of playing last week. But because he is unvaccinated, it's one of those things that they're not gonna take a risk on, and they don't want to see any team have a breakout. And we've got halfway through the season and haven't had awful COVID-19 situations. So hopefully, they can keep this under control. But hopefully Aaron can come back for the life of us, for our fantasy football owners. Because if you weren't lucky enough like me to draft another quarterback like Justin Herbert, then, it's one of those things that you were probably streaming a quarterback, and it's not fun to do that. So those are the 3 things that I learned for week 9. Let's take a deep breath. It's week 9. We got halfway through. Or hopefully you're doing good. I'm sitting at 6-3 in all of my leagues. Let me know what you're doing down below in the comments. Remember to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. Help your boy Tino out, and go follow at TinoTime1996 on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you listen to podcasts. We're out at all your social medias, and just smash that subscribe button for all the amazing fantasy football, wrestling, and baseball content everywhere that you need in podcast world and in the sports world. But now let's talk about week 10, and let's get into everything that's going to happen in week 10, and let's get you ready to set your lineups, and let's get you ready to keep going and feeling good, and let's get through another half of the season, and hopefully you're doing as good as I am in all of my leagues, and we're just gonna keep going, people. It's week 10. Can't even believe I'm saying that. Daylight savings times happened this past Sunday. It's getting dark at 4 o'clock. I don't like it at all, but at least we have football to get us through. We saw a bunch of good shows return, but yeah. So let's get into week 10 of the NFL fantasy football season. And first, before we get into my bold prediction, let's talk about the teams that are on byes this week for week 10. The Chicago Bears are on a bye, so we will be missing David Montgomery. If you picked up Cole Clemette after that great Monday night game, Darrell Mooney has been phenomenal this season with Justin Fields. If you started him this past week, we're missing Jamal Chase, Joe Burrow, we're missing Joe Mixon, we're missing a bunch of guys on the Bengals. The Texans, honestly, Brandon Cooks is the only guy that I would be starting on the Texans anyway. So the Texans are one of those teams that, it's not awful to have them on a bye, but it's not like the worst case scenario. Another team, unless you have like Devonte Booker, or if you have Sterling Shepard, maybe you even started Evan Ingram last week, they are on a bye. This week, honestly, other than Burrow and Chase and David Montgomery and stuff like that, there aren't a lot of teams that are on byes in fantasy purposes, and that's a good thing, especially when we are so far into the fantasy football season and the injuries are ridiculous and there's just so many crazy things going on. But now let's get into the bold predictions like we always do when we start off and we start previewing the week that is ahead. My first bold prediction: a running back or a wide receiver is going to have a total of 200 yards. I don't know who it's going to be, but I'm just saying that somebody in the NFL on Thursday, Sunday, or Monday even will have 200 receiving yards. And on the show next week, we will be talking about the stud of the week. And the guy's going to have probably 40 fantasy points because he's going to have 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a bunch of receiving and a bunch of catches. And that would be down for me. Hopefully it's somebody I have in my league because that's what I need. Washington football Washington football team, the WFT, is going to come out of their bye week, and they're going to be rested up. Scary Terry, Antonio Gibson, they're all going to, Taylor Heineke, they're all going to come out, and they're going to upset Tampa Bay and Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. I don't know what the score will be, but I've got a few bold predictions right with upsets for the weeks. So another upset, I'm calling it. The Washington FT is going to come out of their bye and beat the Buccaneers. My last bold prediction, and I know this might be like, why are we saying it's bold? The Lions are going to get a win. They were on a bye last week. They didn't have to play, so they didn't lose. But now that they're coming off their bye, maybe they're feeling good, they're rested up, and they're doing their thing, and maybe they're ready to showcase, and they're going to come out and they're going to take a victory this upcoming Sunday. So next week, when it happens on Sunday, and then on Tuesday when you listen to Tino's Time, I'll be doing a little bit of a humble brag about how the Lions got their first win. Hopefully, DeAndre Swift is that guy that gets 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. That would help me out a lot. But speaking of guys, we just talked about guys on a bye. There's so many injuries that there's not a lot of injuries, but the injuries have been piling up all season. We will never see these amount of injuries again, to be honest. But we need to find guys to replace these guys. So now let's get into my top 5 waiver wire pickups for week 10. And these guys you need to go out and get right away. My number 5, it's Devin Singletary versus the Jets. I talked about it with Zach Moss being out. It's one of those things that if you need a running back, I would definitely go out and get Devin Singletary. I have him on my bench in one of my leagues, and I lost Derrick Henry. So if Zach Moss is ruled out this week versus the Jets, Devin Singletary could be in for a very good workload, and he could get a few touchdowns, and that's all we need, and that would be a really great spot to put in my RB2. My number 4 waiver wire pickup for the week, it's Elijah Moore. Last week, he had a really good game on Thursday night, and yes, he is going up against the Buffalo Bills defense this week, but the Jets are going to be down. They're going to have to throw the ball, and if Corey Davis is still out, if, we don't see Jamison Crowder do what we know he can do, and he's on and off the field all the time. Elijah Moore seemed to have a really good connection last week with Johnson, and it depends who is going to be the quarterback. But even if Mike White does come back, it's one of those things I would still start Elijah Moore, especially if you're missing Chase, if you're missing, if you're starting Darnell Mooney, if you're starting Brandon Cooks this week, definitely go out and get him. Number 3, the tight end position, we talk about it all the time. It's one of the hardest positions in the NFL, and it's one of the things that it's so hard to find. But Dan Arnold, the past 3 out of 4 weeks, I think it's been, he scored about 10 plus fantasy points, and Trevor Lawrence and him seem to have a really good connection. And it's one of those things that, again, if you need a tight end and you're struggling and you just don't know what to do, and you weren't able to get one of the top 2 or 3 tight ends, go out and get Dan Arnold. He plays the Colts this week, and the Colts are a good defense, but I think Dan Arnold can definitely get a touchdown, and that's what we're looking for in the tight end position. My number 2, I've been talking about this guy for 3 or 4 weeks, and this is going to be the last time I put this guy on the list, because if you haven't already, you're missing out, and he's going to be a great wide receiver down the road, and he could turn into the number 1 receiver for Lamar Jackson. It's Rashad Bateman. He had about 12 points this week. He seemed to continuously getting more and more involved as the weeks go on, and he gets to go up against the Miami Dolphins defense this Thursday night. And again, if you need a wide receiver, if you're missing Chase, you just go out and start Rashad Bateman, because he's going to do his thing and he's going to feel good. And then on Thursday night, you might have 20, 25 fantasy points, and he might even get a couple touchdowns, and you're going to feel real good. My number 1 waiver wire pickup, he's returning from the injury list. He's coming back. Dak Prescott's getting another receiver back. It's Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup has been out for most of the season this season. And, he might not be on the waiver wire. And if the guy was smart, he would have put him in an IR position. But if somebody dropped him and was like, I don't want to deal with him, go out and get him and pick him up. Speaking of another wide receiver, Odell Beckham was released from the Browns, and he is no longer on the team. And now he has to go through waivers and everything. But there's been rumors of him going to Seattle, maybe San Francisco, New Orleans. Who knows? He could go even to the Chiefs. If Odell Beckham goes to a new team, he could easily become a wide receiver one. So if you have an open position on your roster, go out and get Odell Beckham, especially if you need a wide receiver, because it's one of those things that he could come back and he could do his thing, or he could suck again. But at least if you have him, you could do it. You could just be like, holy crap. And down the road in a few weeks, if he does get signed to a team this upcoming week, which I'll keep an eye on, and go check out Tino's Time on all your social medias to keep up on the news for Odell. But if he does sign and if he does start in a few weeks, he could be one of your top wide receivers going into the fantasy playoffs. And he could even lead you to a fantasy football championship. So make sure to go out and get Odell Beckham if you have a roster spot. And those are my top 5 waiver wire pickups for Week 10. Now that we talked about the top 5 waiver wire pickups for Week 10, let's go into the starts, the sits, and the streams. All the guys you need to put in your lineup, all the guys you need to take out, excuse me, and some guys you can stream to put in the place of the guys that you need to sit this week. But let's start off with the starts for Week 10. Josh Allen versus the Jets. Don't freak out. Josh Allen had a bad game versus the Jaguars. And again, we know it's any given Sunday, but Josh Allen hopefully will bounce back versus the Jets. So keep him in your lineup and don't do anything crazy because Josh Allen is going to be okay. He's returning. We talked about it in the injuries. Dangerous Russell Wilson. He got the pin out of his finger. He got the clarity to return to the Seattle Seahawks versus the Green Bay Packers this upcoming Sunday. So put Russell Wilson in your lineup. Drop your backup quarterback. Free up an IR spot because I'm sure there's somebody else you could put in there with all the crazy injuries. And put Russell Wilson back in your lineup versus the Green Bay Packers because he's going to come back and he's going to show everybody why he is one of the best quarterbacks in the game. The two running backs, before we get to wide receivers, the two running backs you need to start this week, it's Devin Singletary versus the Jets. We talked about it with Zach Moss. Zach Moss possibly will be out, and Devin Singletary is a great matchup versus the Jets this week. So if you need a running back, go put him in your lineup and feel good. James Conner versus the Panthers. James Conner is a guy, I talked about it in my humble brag in the studs of the week. He did his thing. And now with the news of Chase Edmonds, he is going to be out for a while. So if you need a running back and you're able to be lucky enough to get James Conner off of the waiver wire, start him, keep him in your lineup until Chase Edmonds comes back. And who knows, in 2 or 3 weeks, James Conner might have just overlapped Chase Edmonds, and Chase Edmonds just might be the second RB. Who knows? But right now, with Chase Edmonds out, James Conner is the number 1 running back. So start him versus the Panthers. The 2 wide receivers we're starting this week is Russell Gage versus the Cowboys. Matt Ryan had a phenomenal game last week. We saw the Dallas Cowboys give up 30 points to Teddy Bridgewater, Tim Patrick, and the Denver Broncos. And hopefully Matt Ryan could do what he did last week and have a good game. So hopefully Russell Gage. And again, if you need a wide receiver with Jamal Chase, with Darryl Mooney, with Allen Robinson, with all these guys on, there's not a lot of wide receivers, but with the injuries and everything going on and guys just being disappointing, if you need a wide receiver, I would definitely go out and see about definitely going out and getting Russell Gage. He's back. He gets his best buddy back, Tyler Lockett. Put him back in your lineup. If you didn't listen to me a few weeks ago, I told you to go out and trade for him. I tried to trade for him, but nobody was going to give him up because they were thinking the same thing I was thinking. He gets his best buddy back in Dangerous Russell Wilson. Tyler Lockett is back, and he's going to be able to do his thing. And, he did have that one good game with Geno Smith, but it's just not the same, and they just don't have the same connection that Russ and Tyler have. So put him back in your lineup, and hopefully you listened to me and picked him up and traded for him a few weeks ago. The 2 tight ends you need to start this week, it's 2 tight ends in the same game on Thursday night. Mark Andrews versus the Dolphins, and Mike Gesicki versus the Ravens. Mike Gesicki, the Ravens give up the most points to tight ends this year for fantasy football, and I think Mike Gesicki can get a touchdown, and that's all we're relying on. Mark Andrews is, one of the best tight ends this season, and he's been better than George Kittle, Darren Waller. He's been better than Travis Kelce. I think he's actually is the best tight end in fantasy football purposes at the position this year. So start Mark Andrews and keep him in your lineup, and on Thursday night, I think that game might be higher scoring than we think. The defense that you need to start this week, and I know I said it in my bold predictions, But start the Steelers this week versus the awful Detroit Lions. The Lions might be able to come back. And if they do and they win, I'll be able to say a little bit of a humble brag because I said it on this week's episode. But let's not go crazy. And, we don't know what could happen. And, the Lions might come out of their bye and win and do their thing. But right now, I just feel comfortable starting the Steelers. So the Steelers defense is the start of the week at the defensive position. And, we'll talk about a stream in a second, but with these defenses, sometimes can win you your week. We talked about it with the Patriots last week. They got 34 points. The Dolphins got 19. We saw the Browns get 20. Defenses can help you win. So think about it and make sure you pick the right defense. But now that we talked about the guys that we're going to start, who are we going to sit and put on the bench this week? Jimmy Garoppolo, he had a good game versus the 49ers, or not, I'm sorry, he plays for the 49ers. He had a good game versus the Arizona Cardinals defense, but now he gets to go up against the Los Angeles Rams on Monday Night Football when they get Von Miller, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Leonard Floyd. I could just go on and on about that defense. Don't start Jimmy Garoppolo because I think that Rams defense is just going to feast. Mac Jones is another one. He had a good game this past week, and, he didn't do, awful, but the Browns defense has been really good, and we saw what they did last week, too. Joe Burrow, they made Jamal Chase look like a human. The Bengals offense just could not get going. So, sit Mac Jones this week, because I don't know if he's going to have a very good game, and we don't want to be this late into the season having to start Mac Jones and hoping that he could have a good game versus a really good defense. Michael Carter versus the Bills. That Bills defense has been phenomenal. And now, after last week, they're going to come out and want to come out for blood. And I think that the Rams are just not. The Rams are going to be that. The Rams are so mad after losing to the Titans. I think I was talking about the Bills for a second. The Bills are going up against the Jets, and they're having to do their same thing. But the Rams were a team that had a really bad game. And the Rams were a team that had a bad game. And, they're going to want to feast on Elijah Mitchell. So sit Elijah Mitchell and sit Michael Carter. Michael Carter was the guy I was talking about that's facing the Bills. So sit Michael Carter versus the Bills and also sit Elijah Mitchell versus the Rams. Sorry, I got a little confused there and I got a little bit off track, but that's okay. We got back to it. So sit Michael Carter and Elijah Mitchell this week. The two wide receivers, or just the four maybe wide receivers in general, sit Mike Williams. Right now, I just cannot trust Mike Williams. He had a bunch of good games the first 4 weeks of the season, but now he's barely catching the ball. Justin Herbert's looking Keenan Allen's way. He's looking Guyton's way. He's looking other people's way, and he's just not looking Mike Williams' way as much as he was. Mike Williams did catch one deep pass for 49 yards and then another pass for 9 yards, and that was it. And, thank God for that long pass that helped us get some points, but I just don't know if I can trust him anymore. The Lions wide receivers, I don't know how well they're going to do versus the Steelers. Justin Fields had a really good game on on Monday Night Football, but the Lions are just, I don't know what the Lions receivers are going to be able to do. So honestly, if you have better options, and unless you're so desperate, the only two Lions I'm starting this week is DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson. Anybody else I'm staying away from. The two tight ends you need to sit this week, it's Ricky Seals-Jones. He's coming back off of a bye, but before that bye, he struggled a few weeks. He had a good few weeks before that, but, he isn't what we thought he was going to be. And with Taylor Heinicke, I just don't know if I can trust him. And I'm hoping that Antonio Gibson can come back and do his thing. But they're facing the Bucs, and the Bucs are also coming off of a bye, and they're going to be healthy and ready to go. So I just don't know how well that Washington FT offense is going to move versus the Buccaneers. So I'm staying away from a lot of the Washington FT unless you have to start scary Terry McLaurin or Antonio Gibson. But other than that, I just don't know if I can trust them versus the Buccaneers this week. Austin Hooper versus the Patriots. The Patriots defense was phenomenal. They made Sam Darnold look like a child. They made him look like he was back on the Jets. And, I just don't know how well that's going to go for the Browns and Pats, and honestly, this could be a very low-scoring game, and it could come down to like a 10-13 or something like that. So I'm staying away from both offenses if you can, and honestly, you're only starting Nick Chubb from the Browns, maybe even, maybe Ejiofor if you have to, but I don't know if I can trust any of the Browns versus the Patriots. That Patriots defense was just phenomenal, and they've been really good all season long, and they've been really underrated because they don't have the best record, and they're not the team that everybody's looking at no more. The defense that you need to sit, it's the Saints versus the Titans. The Titans went out, and after losing King Henry, they showed that they are still the team to beat, and they went in on Sunday night and beat the Los Angeles Rams, and Matthew Stafford looked like he was the guy that was on the Detroit Lions, and it just, the Titans defense is really good, so do not start the Saints defense, because you might be thinking without King Henry, they're not going to be very good, but Adrian Peterson got a touchdown, and I think they're just going to be perfectly fine. So don't sit the Saints, but start the Titans defense or stream the Titans defense. We're going to do it a little upside down this week for the streams. We'll talk about the defense first, and then we'll go back up to the quarterback. I just talked about the Saints defense that you need to sit this week. A stream defense that you can stream this week is the Titans. The Titans had a phenomenal game last week versus Matthew Stafford, and they just continue to do their thing, and they're beating teams like the Bills. They're beating teams like the Chiefs. They're going out and they're beating the Rams. They're just doing their thing, and they're showing that they are the team to beat. And even without King Henry, that defense, even though King Henry isn't on the defense, that offense is still doing okay. McNichols and Peterson, I think, will be perfectly fine. I think the Titans are going to still be able to make the playoffs, and if they do, we've heard rumors that King Henry can return. So if that happens, who knows what can happen, and we might be able to see the Titans in the Super Bowl this year. Wouldn't that be crazy? And that would just be a story. Them losing their best running back, him coming back. Maybe he'll even be the Super Bowl MVP. Halfway through season prediction, Derrick Henry returns for the playoffs, and the Titans go on to win the Super Bowl, and Derrick Henry is the MVP. But that's way next year in February. Let's talk about the quarterbacks that you can stream this week. Now that I talked about the Titans, the two quarterbacks you can stream this week is Ben Roethlisberger versus the Lions. Lions coming off of a bye. They were going to be healthier, and they're going to be able to be a lot fresh and stuff. But I think that Ben Roethlisberger is a really good stream this week, especially, if you're missing Joe Burrow, if you were starting Justin Fields for some reason. I don't know why you would be if you were starting Tyrod Taylor. I saw a lot of people that were starting Tyrod, and I don't know why anybody thought that was going to make a big difference, and it's just that Houston Texans offense was awful. So if you need a quarterback this week, go out and start Big Ben versus the Lions, because the Lions just might not win a game this season. So Big Ben should have a really good game. The other quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, he had a really good game this past week, and now he gets to go up against the Eagles. So if you need a quarterback to stream, go out and get Teddy Bridgewater and feel good. I can't even believe I am saying this, and I can't even believe I'm telling you to stream this guy. I thought it was 2016. Jordan Howard for the Philadelphia Eagles. We saw Boston Scott have 4 points. Kenneth Gainwell, nothing. You just cost me a week of my fantasy football season, and I'm not letting it go, because every single time we sit you, you get a touchdown, and every time we start you, you do nothing. So, Jordan Howard, though, has been very consistent in the backfield, so he is the one guy in the Philadelphia Eagles backfield. If you need a streaming running back this week, if you're missing David Montgomery, Joe Mixon, whoever you're missing, go out and stream Jordan Howard. Another running back is this, again, I just don't even know what year it is. Devonte Freeman for the Baltimore Ravens versus the Dolphins on Thursday night. If you need a running back, and this is more for like 10 to 12 to 14 team leagues, definitely go out and see if you could stream Devonte Freeman and just see if you could get him, because again, if you need a running back, you're missing Zach Moss, if you got Derrick Henry, if you're struggling at running back, go out and get Devonte Freeman, because it seems like they're using the running game more, even though Lamar Jackson runs the ball so much. Devonte Freeman could get a touchdown, and I'll take that from a streaming running back that you could be starting in your flex in deeper leagues. The two wide receivers you need to stream this week, it's Michael Gallup versus the Falcons. And the only reason why I'm telling you to stream him and not start him, and I'm not let's go, is only because I don't know what he's going to do coming off the first week of his injury. And it might take a few weeks to get going, but what are you going to do with all of the injuries and everything going on in the NFL, not knowing what's going on with Odell, Calvin Ridley, sitting at home trying to figure out what's going on with him, all these things, we need wide receivers, so go out and take Michael Gallup off your IR. Go pick him up off the waiver wire if he's still out there for some reason, and put him in your lineup versus the Falcons. Brandon Ayuk, welcome back to fantasy football, I guess. You've been back the last few weeks, and you've been doing your thing. But he does go up against the Rams on Monday Night Football. And, the Rams defense didn't look very good versus the Titans. But it's one of those things that I still think that Brandon Ayuk could get some receptions. And especially in PPR leagues, you need a wide receiver. Again, Jamal Chase. Jamal Chase, I could keep saying it. He's out this week, and he's been one of the best wide receivers in the league. So again, if you need a wide receiver, go out and stream Brandon Ayuk. The 2 tight ends you need to stream this week, it's Pat Freiermuth. I talked about him earlier. He had a great game on Monday night. He scored 2 touchdowns versus the Chicago Bears. And now he gets to go up against the Lions, a defense that isn't as good as the Chicago Bears. And, he's been very consistent the last few weeks. So if you need a tight end, go out and get him and feel good because he's been really good. Dan Arnold, another guy, I talked about him earlier in the waiver wire pickups. He's been really good, and him and Trevor Lawrence have a really good connection. So if you need a tight end, go stream Dan Arnold versus the Colts this week. The Titans, I talked about it. Stream the Titans versus the Saints. That was the first thing we talked about. So make sure you start, you sit, and you stream all of those players for week 10 if you want to get a victory. And hopefully if you have those sits of the week and you have those guys, hopefully they don't cost you, and hopefully you can rise above it, and somebody in your league or somebody on your team can score big enough points to help you rise above the guys that you need to sit because they just have really bad matchups. But now that we talked about the starts, the sits, and the streams, we are halfway through the fantasy football season, and that could only mean one thing. It's time to do halfway award winners for halfway through the NFL fantasy football season. We're going to do MVP, Rookie of the Year, Waiver Wire Pickup, and the biggest disappointment for the NFL fantasy season so far. And then at the end of the year, we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to see if it changed, and we're going to see if maybe these guys bounce back, if these guys slow down, if these guys continue to do what they're doing, and hopefully they do, because a lot of these guys were guys, if you have on your team, they're probably helping you stay afloat with everything that's been happening. Let's start off with MVP. The MVP this season, so far, halfway through the season, is a guy that we probably drafted in the 5th or 6th round. We didn't think he was going to be this good, and he's been the number 1 wide receiver from the Los Angeles Rams. Cooper Kupp has had a phenomenal halfway through the season. He has had 74 receptions, 1,019 yards, and he has 10 total touchdowns. If you were able to get Cooper Kupp, he's been phenomenal. He's been scoring 15, 20 plus fantasy points a lot this season. He's been keeping everybody afloat. If you're able to get him as a wide receiver too, and if you were still able to get an A.J. Brown or Justin Jefferson, and if he fell in your lap, Cooper Kupp has been the MVP halfway through the season, and you deserve it. And if you have him, you're probably feeling real good, and you're probably sitting at the top of your team and at the top of your division or at the top of your league right now. The Rookie of the Year, this guy, he was drafted very high. He had drop problems in the preseason. He fell a lot in the rounds in the draft, and everybody didn't know what to do, and they were making fun of him. But once the season started, this guy made no excuses. He made no jokes, and he just came out and balled. We talked about him earlier in the disappointments, but that's okay. He goes on a bye. He'll come back, and he gets to hit the reset button. It's Jamal Chase. He had 4 weeks of 20-plus points. He has been phenomenal all season long. He's caught bomb after bomb from Joe Burrow, and he's a guy, if you're able to get in keeper leagues, I would keep him because you probably spent a high or a low capital like draft pick, and you probably got him later around, and he could easily be your wide receiver 1 for the years to come, especially in dynasty leagues. Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are that connection that LSU had and now the Bengals have, and it's just awesome to see. So, Jamar Chase, you are my Rookie of the Year. Now, the waiver wire pickup. This guy was a guy that was on the Chicago Bears. He was on the New England Patriots. New England Patriots used him pretty well. The Chicago Bears didn't know how to use him at all. But Arthur Smith went out in the offseason and got Cordell Patterson. This guy can do everything. He's a kick returner, a punt returner, a running back, a wide receiver. He could play quarterback, for God's sakes. He even said it in an interview that if my mom can work 3 jobs and go out there and do her thing, then I can go out there and play every position on Sunday. And that is a fact, and that just shows his mentality, and that's awesome. Cordell Patterson is a waiver wire pickup wonder because he's been phenomenal all season long. He has 7 touchdowns, 7 out of 8 of the weeks this season, and we're in week 10 now, so that means only 1 week. He did not have 15 plus fantasy points. Sadly, because all of my running backs in one of my leagues, Derrick Henry, DeAndre Swift was on a bye, and he's been having injury problems. I traded away a few people. Cordell Patterson has become my RB1, and thank God I got him in the waiver wire because he's been phenomenal, and he's saving my season. So hopefully he's saving yours, and he's doing his thing, and hopefully they continue to use him, and he can lead us all to a fantasy football championship. The last award for halfway through the season, it's the disappointment, and I hate to say it, he had probably his best game in a while last night. Allen Robinson, he has not done anything. He's had no weeks with 11 plus points. Last night he had a couple big catches for the Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Bears almost beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, but Allen Robinson didn't do very good, and he only had about 10.9 points, and he still didn't even hit 11 points. And we were hoping that he was going to come out and do his thing with Justin Fields, and this was going to be the quarterback that Allen Robinson finally needed, but it's not, and Darryl Mooney's getting involved more. So the biggest disappointment so far through the halfway of the fantasy football season has been Allen Robinson. The Bears now go on a bye, so hopefully the Bears can figure out and get going, and we'll see what happens. But Allen Robinson, you've been a straight disappointment, especially where we drafted you this year in the fantasy football drafts and everything. Hopefully you can figure it out after the bye. But now that we talked about the fantasy awards, let's go back into a thing that we always do here on Tino's Time. Let's talk about the 3 games that are going to be fantasy gold. The Falcons versus them boys. Them boys were feeling good. They were doing their thing. They thought they were owning the NFC. They were owning the NFL. But they got a reality check versus the Denver Broncos. And Dak Prescott didn't have a good game. Zeke Elliot didn't have a good game. CeeDee Lamb didn't have a phenomenal game. Cooper didn't have a great game. All of them just really struggled. But they're going to come out, and now they get to play a Falcons defense. They played really good versus Trevor Siemian. But they're going up against Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott is going to be frustrated. So he's going to come out and do his thing. So start everybody in this game and feel good about it. Matt Ryan, Cordell, Russell Gage, I told you to, Kyle Pitts, all Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, Zeke Elliott. Just start everybody. The Vikings and Chargers is another game. This game could be a 34-31. Justin Herbert put on a show last week. Kirk Cousins did his thing, and he did pretty well, even though the Ravens came out and the Vikings blew a 14-point game lead. In fantasy purposes, that don't matter because that just means Lamar Jackson got more points, and they went into overtime, and that means more points for fantasy football. Gotta love garbage time and overtime for fantasy football. Seattle Seahawks versus the Green Bay Packers. Start everybody in this game. We're getting Dangerous Russ returning. We said it earlier. He's returning. He's back. He got the pin out of his finger. We got Tyler Lockett. He gets his best buddy back, DK Metcalf. And hopefully the Packers will have to see. But this is something you need to keep an eye on because Aaron Rodgers still has to be tested negative twice. And we talked about it earlier. So we'll have to see, but keep an eye on that. He is eligible to return on Saturday. So as long as he tests negative on Saturday, he will play in this game. And if he does, start all your Packers. Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, Devonte Adams, MVS. All of them, Mercedes Lewis, maybe even, maybe if you have to. I feel more comfortable starting him with Aaron Rodgers. Jordan Love just didn't look good at all. And if Jordan Love is starting this game, Seattle is another defense that you could easily stream this week because the way Jordan Love looked last week was not good. And that just, will not be very good. But again, this is something that could go on longer depending on what happens on Saturday with Aaron Rodgers and the COVID test. So just keep an eye on that and watch everything on the news and see what happens. But I still think you need to start everybody in this game. So those are my 3 games that are going to be fantasy gold for week 10. And now let's do the last thing that we do here. And before I say goodbye until we say goodnight, and I say goodbye until next week when we recap week 10 and get you ready for week 11, it's my 3 guarantees of week 10. My first guaranteed, Mike Gesicki is going to score a touchdown on Thursday night versus the Ravens. The Ravens have given up the most points to tight ends this season in the fantasy football season. So if you have Mike Gesicki at your tight end position, feel good about starting him versus the Ravens this week because I guarantee you he's going to get a touchdown. The Bills are going to bounce back versus the Jets. Josh Allen, Devin Singletary. Hopefully Stephon Diggs could have a game. Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, maybe even Dawson Knox will return. He's a guy, he's been out for a while. We'll have to see what happens. But the Bills are going to bounce back versus the Jets. And don't you worry and don't you freak out. And please don't you dare sit Josh Allen, because if you do, you're going to have to, that's just not okay. The Bucs will not miss a step. I know I said it, the Washington FT earlier might be able to upset the Bucs and they might be able to do their thing, but let's be real, that's probably not going to happen. Tom Brady gets a bye week. He gets to get fresh legs. He gets to do his thing. He gets to go golf. He gets to just chill. So now he gets to come back and play the Washington FT on Sunday, and Brady's not going to miss a step. The Buccaneers aren't going to miss a step, and they're going to destroy and beat the Washington football team. And there you have it. We've recapped everything that happened in Week 9. I got you ready to set your lineups for Week 10. I hope everybody's listening every week. I hope everybody's having a good fantasy football season. Hopefully you haven't been destroyed by injuries like I have in some of my leagues and some of my other friends have. Hopefully we're doing good. Hopefully everybody's listening. Daylight savings time was not very fun this past Sunday, waking up and then it being dark at 4 o'clock. I walked upstairs and I was like, where'd the sunlight go? It was only like halftime of the 3 o'clock games. It was just ridiculous. I hope, even though it's daylight savings time, we'll get through it. And before you know it, we'll be back to the sunny weather. But that means fantasy football season and football season will be over, and we don't want that yet. So I hope everybody listens. I hope everybody enjoys. I hope all this information helps. Remember to go smash that subscribe button. Go like, follow at TinoTime1996. Tino's Time on Facebook. Tino's Time on Instagram. Tino's Time Wrestling. We have Survivor Series coming up. It's the 1-year anniversary for Tino's Time Wrestling. We're going to be having a really good show, so make sure to check that out. But for all your NFL fantasy football needs, this is your boy Tino, and until next week when we preview Week 11 and we recap Week 10, this is your boy Tino signing out.